times of crisis and triumph, people often turn to symbolism to restore and promote hope. During two of the most impactful events in America's history, the Great Depression and the end of World War II, citizens of the United States sought sites across the country to behold as historical landmarks. Demanding greater architectural recognition of the nation's founding, citizens rediscovered a colonial-era building lost amongst the urban streets of Philadelphia, a symbol of their great nation, founded within the forgotten structure's very walls, begging to have glory once again bestowed upon it, pleading for action in the form of urban renewal. This building was none other than Independence Hall. In the 1940s and 1950s, the preservation of important historical buildings became a top priority in cities across the nation. Concern of damage from fire hazards and World War led Philadelphians to develop an intensified regard for Independence Hall as a national treasure, one whose survival rested in their hands. Over a span of the next century, proposals to ensure the preservation of Independence Hall were undertaken. The long-neglected encompassing area and dilapidated warehouses made it next to impossible to find the hall, let alone view it from distance. Architects and planners got to work, proposing numerous plans to beautify the surrounding area and enshrine Independence Hall as the national treasure it was. In 1900, the first of many plans to be proposed was brought forth by George Erasmus Niche. Niche's public request for a landscape park in place of the buildings north of Independence Hall sparked further ideation in 1915, when architects David Knickerbocker Boyd and Albert Kelsey proposed the earliest plan for an open square across from Independence Hall. A smaller half-block park with a reviewing square, fountains, statues of Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, and a 13-arch red brick colonnade symbolizing the 13 colonies and the founding of the nation in Independence Hall. In 1924, Jacques Guibert would be the next to draw up plans for a courtyard in front of Independence Hall. Guibert called his plans Memorial Court, a design he would later revise in 1930. A few years later, in 1933, Philippe Crête proposed a similar plan, this time with a semicircular colonnade, and later extended rectangular colonnade in front of Independence Hall. The onset of the Great Depression halted plans for the creation of a mall, but heightened the public urgency to construct one. In the area surrounding Independence Hall, known as the Fifth Ward, the Depression resulted in neglect, vacancy, abandoned commercial buildings, and slum-like conditions. Another major step towards the creation of Independence Mall was achieved in 1937, when architect Roy Larson proposed the creation of an L-shaped park, 3 blocks to the north and 2 blocks to the east of Independence Hall. The innovative proposal connected the Customs and Border Protection Building, Independence Hall, and the newly constructed Delaware River Bridge, now known as the Benjamin Franklin Bridge. A major push for a national park at Independence Hall arose in the late 1930s and early 1940s, when lawyer Isidore Ostroff and Judge Edwin O. Lewis began organizing petitions. In May of 1942, Lewis and Ostroff successfully formed a group called the Committee for the Conservation of Historic Sites in Old Philadelphia. Later renamed the Independence Hall Association, the group would become the major lobbying organization for building these parks. Armed with a petition of approximately 1,200 Fifth Ward residents' signatures, the Independence Hall Association successfully lobbied Congress for a national park adjacent to Independence Mall, and in 1945, Congress created the National Shrines Commission, pledging $4 million in state money for the creation of a national park. (1949) served as a major year for Philadelphia and cities across the United States. The city of Philadelphia welcomed Edmund Bacon as the new director of the Philadelphia City Planning Commission, and the nation welcomed the passing of the Housing Act of 1949. This act enabled redevelopment in major cities as long as the projects involved only the clearance and redevelopment of blighted neighborhoods. Bacon and the Philadelphia Planning Commission were in luck, as the Housing Act and the designation of the Fifth Ward as blighted enabled Bacon to continue with the already underway plans for Independence Mall. Bacon envisioned a two-part plan for Philadelphia, which he displayed in 1947 at the Better Philadelphia exhibition at Gimbel's department store in Center City. Designed to engage the public and drive interest in the urban renewal of Philadelphia, it was at this exhibition that Bacon revealed his plans to transform the city in time to host the 1976 World's Fair, a golden opportunity for Bacon to showcase the new Philadelphia, in which Independence Mall would serve as the centerpiece. Bacon saw Center City as a place where he could plan and tie together a large number of projects. His plans for Center City included connecting Independence Mall to Washington Square and Franklin Square through a greenway system, as well as walking paths through the middle blocks of the mall, which would link together many of Philadelphia's significant historical sites. Bacon was determined to not only construct Independence Mall, but also reinvigorate the surrounding area. His plans to improve the blighted neighborhood by creating new building sites around the perimeter of the mall were designed in hopes that, through tourism-driven preservation, selective clearance, and redevelopment, he would be able to halt the decline of the surrounding area. In July of 1952, Bacon and his architects revealed their study and plans for Independence Mall. The plans called for the first block to be lined with a double row of trees that would frame Independence Hall. A paved plaza and fountains would be built on the second block, while the third would include landscaping and a plaza of flagpoles. Progress was made on Independence Mall from the early stages of clearing beginning in 1952 to the completion of the first block in 1954. By 1959, the demolition of the second block had taken place, and construction of the mall's second block was underway. It would, however, take a total of 15 years when finally in 1967 Independence Mall was officially completed. The completion of Independence Mall in 1967 was immediately seen as an opportunity to gain investment in the city. Bacon's plans to revitalize the area by encouraging major corporations to build on the perimeter of the mall quickly paid off when the Philadelphia Police Department and Federal Grant Services Administration agreed to construct their new headquarters, a courthouse, and federal office building. Following suit, Congress approved the construction of a new U.S. Mint on the mall, and the major corporation Rahm & Haas agreed to give up their plans to move to the suburbs in favor of building on the more prestigious mall. Nearly a decade after its completion, Independence Mall underwent massive changes. The first major development was a permanent home for the Liberty Bell on the first block of the mall. In 1976, after much deliberation, the Liberty Bell Pavilion was constructed, immediately changing the fabric and landscape of Independence Mall. Other minor additions and changes to the mall took place throughout the years, with the next substantial changes occurring in 2001 and 2003, when the Visitor Center and Constitution Center were constructed on the second and third blocks of the mall respectively. The addition and changes since its completion in 1967 have drastically altered the mall's appearance, instilling more flames into the fiery conversation that is Independence Mall. The creation of Independence Mall was not without consequence. In order to build a grand setting for the hall, the National Park Service demolished numerous blocks of significant buildings, disrupted the urban fabric, and in the process destroyed more than half of 150 buildings which were identified by the American Institute of Architects as historically significant. Key structures raised for the creation of Independence Mall included the Provident Life and Trust building, built in 1879 and considered one of famous architect Frank Furness's finest works, the President's House, once occupied by George Washington and John Adams, and the Jane Building, an early skyscraper built in 1850. The majority of this destruction was the responsibility of the National Park Service and not of Bacon and the city planners. In response to this destruction, Bacon called the Park Service's demolition of this block and the Jane Building
the worst single act of architectural vandalism I've ever experienced.
After Independence Mall's completion, many other notable figures in its planning and proposal questioned the results. Judge Edwin O. Lewis stated,
I sometimes wonder if I've created a Frankenstein's monster, whether it's used enough to justify the extra blocks. I go by there and see it all empty and think, now what did you create that for? Maybe you overdid it.
While yet another historian mentioned,
They took one of the largest buildings in the colonies and made it a paperweight on the desk of Independence National Historic Park.
The creation of Independence Mall has left Philadelphians with countless uncertainties. Even into the 21st century, talks of renovation are continuing to take place. Despite over $300 million spent in improvements to the landscaping and visitor center, some patrons and historians still claim the mall remains a scaleless civic no man's land. Independence Mall has forever impacted the urban fabric of Philadelphia. 19th century structures that were deemed unaffiliated with the nation's founding or city's early settlement and history were swept away, leaving an aftermath of an 18th century story of the city. The creation of Independence Mall, amongst other urban renewal projects, is solely responsible for erasing an entire century of history right before the public's eyes. The creation of Independence Mall will forever have Philadelphians wondering, questioning, was the history lost worth the millions spent? Does a nearly century-long absence of historical structures create a false narrative of Philadelphia, leaving Independence Hall without its true context? If urban renewal truly salvaged the shrine or destroyed its significance, and if the stately mall that was once seen as lost amongst a sea of urban buildings is once again lost in a sea of emptiness.